Hello, I'm Mike Smitka, an economist by training and one of the organizers of this year's GERPISA conference. I have a long-standing interest in cars as differentiated consumer durables. So the topic that I want to look at in this research project is whether there is a new car effect. And my quick answer is no. So what's different about a new car, or specifically a new model? So a new model effect is widely touted by journalists. It's certainly in the media. It's certainly the lifeblood of automotive journalists. Their motto, I'm told, is drink free and drive. Hopefully not in that order. So the question is, does their work have an impact? At launch, does a new model perform well? And then as the media hype fades, do sales taper off? The theory is ambiguous. The data seem to show, nope, there's no consistent effect. So let me give you my analysis, which uses monthly data from China. So anyway, in China, as elsewhere, new car websites are prolific. I have about 20 bookmarked that I go to regularly, but there are many, many more than that. You know, they'll typically include a photo, bunch of photos, discussions of features. Most of them have something on the driving experience, and the better ones have explicit comparisons with other models and brands. So they give strengths and weaknesses across brands for the car that they're actually looking at. So just a couple examples. There's Gasku, which is the site I go to most frequently. The first one of these is looking at the Subaru Forester, and the second one is looking at the Polestar 2. So if there are sites that are EV only. So this particular site, which has a fair number of reviews, but isn't primarily reviews, had one new model review for April and 4 for May. And then in the context of this conference, where we have a lot of Ford things going on, the Ford Focus, the new model launched in China on June 6th. And so you can find reviews of that one. And finally, you can get the talking heads sort of shows where part of the show at least involves actually driving cars around and pictures of them dodging cones and that sort of thing. Okay. Anyway, so the media hype would suggest that there'd be high initial volume. In addition, from a theoretical perspective, a new launch means a new model, and with differentiated goods, that gives consumers a choice they didn't have before. And so there should be some substitution away from existing models to the new model. If the product strategists and the development team have done their job, a new model would generally address emerging needs. So whether it's features on the interior of a car or safety equipment or the niche in which the new car is being positioned. Second, at launch, there's no Model T effect. So Henry Ford's quip was that his own, the greatest competitor to the Model T was used Model Ts. But for a new vehicle, there isn't any cannibalization going on. And then, as I've mentioned, there's a lot of advertising at the launch of a vehicle. There are a lot of initial marketing expenditures, but the economic literature of advertising stresses that the impact of an ad fades fairly quickly. Furthermore, do potential purchasers only scan the headlines, or do they actually read these reviews, some of which are quite critical of a particular model? To emphasize that or reinforce that, these websites typically list competitive products, because after all, they're after advertising revenue. And so they want to get someone to click on several different cars and not just the one that they have listened to the review of. Okay. There are also things that might suggest that initial volumes would be low. So as a differentiated consumer good, there's what would be called vertical price discrimination. When a new model comes out, there are some people who really like it, and so would be prepared to pay more than the middling potential consumer. And so a car company may target those consumers who are really enamored of a new vehicle by offering only high trim packages in limited volume at the launch. Of course, limiting upfront volumes is something that is also desirable from a manufacturing perspective. The more that you emphasize volume up front, particularly if you're including those high trim packages, the more complexity you're introducing. So, you avoid both potential complexity and the challenge of ramping up a vehicle if you don't try to sell a lot up front. Of course, over time, the new effects diminish. There's a constant stream of other new vehicles being launched. Fashion cycles are something that are well known. And some vehicles their styling holds up, but others, the fashioning becomes stale relatively quickly. Used cars become available a year or two after launch in the United States, where a lot of cars are sold under 2 or 3 year leases. The first year may be fine, but by the end of the second year, consumers have the potential of buying low mileage, well-maintained, fairly new cars at a lower price. And then advertising fades in effectiveness. But over and above all, prices aren't fixed. So the core study here is one by Copeland and co-authors looking at US data for a model, and it found that over the life of a model, prices fell on average about 9.4% per annum, which means that after 3 years, prices would tend to be 25% below what they were when the car first went on sale. So the evidence is there that companies can and do try to smooth sales and production volumes across time, rather than have things bunch up in the initial period of launch. Just to reinforce this, discounting in China is pervasive. I've followed news on Wuhan since the initial COVID lockdowns in March 2020. Wuhan is where the biggest joint venture of Honda is located. And so this is looking at an 8% price cut of the Honda Integra, which actually isn't made in Wuhan, but is made in Guangzhou by the GAC Honda joint venture. So it's very easy to find current prices all giving percent change from list price. So that's, again, a typical feature of a lot of these Chinese car sites. Okay, so theory is ambiguous. Various things could generate different sorts of time profiles. And of course, as consumer products, there are lots of intangible factors. Models that might sell well at the start, but bomb totally, like the Ford Edsel. Cars that are launched without any particular expectations that then become better and better sellers, such as the Ford Mustang in the 1960s. And then there are overall secular trends, such as the rise of SUVs. In China, a company called Great Wall happened to launch SUVs as their initial products, building off of a commercial vehicle background. And they hit the sweet spot. They were one of the earlier entrants. And they've ridden that to become a significant player in the Chinese market. Okay, the literature on this. I only found one paper out of the huge literature on marketing and on automotive and cars that focus specifically on new car launches. But it's one that was weekly California data with a focus on finance. And most of the models that it included were facelifts and replacements, not totally new models. So it didn't offer a whole lot to guide this research. There are how-to studies of actually doing a new car launch, There are studies such as the Copeland one I mentioned on pricing and durable goods. There are papers on price discrimination and product differentiation in the auto industry. And there are papers that look at new product marketing, though very few to my great surprise. So it, to me, becomes an empirical question. So I draw data from a Chinese website that gives monthly sales data for all except a handful of imported models. So my data set included 651 models up front, and defining a new model as a car that had positive sales after a string of months with zero sales. Within this less than 3 year time period, there were 278 new models launched. And this undercounts because some of the existing companies, VW and Honda and others, had replacement models. But since those wouldn't be very helpful for me, even though I do have separate data on replacements and facelifts and so on. Okay, so I put everything into a spreadsheet with model name and company, and price range, and then monthly sales data. And I can take and sort them and slice them and dice them. And I did a lot of that. So I deleted all of the models for which I had less than 10 months of data. I deleted all those who have missing or odd data, such as Tesla with their end of quarter sales surge, where they will have almost no sales at the start of a quarter. I deleted the models where at peak sales we're selling under 1,000 units in a month. So my final sample that I use here had 100 models. So what do I find? One other challenge is volatility. Sales in China are known to be seasonal, and in addition, we've had COVID. So unfortunately, I don't have pre-COVID data, but that's the way it goes. So Chinese New Year's sales fall, summer doldrums sales fall, lockdowns and sales fall. So I divide the sales in individual months by overall sales for all passenger vehicles in those months. Okay, here's the actual variance in the data there. You can see bounce around a lot from almost no sales across the industry in the onset of COVID, and then a sharp decline recently. If we look at the battery electric vehicles, the green line, 2019 starts here. And you can see not just that it's quite volatile, but that there's a very strong increasing trend. So I don't segment data there. So anyway, I take and divide by sales level, and then I normalize everything to the highest month. So for example, the Hongguang Mini in the first month it went on sale, sold at 67% of peak. It hit peak in the 7th month on sale, and in the most recent month for which I have data, it was still at 88% of peak sales. So that's what I'm looking at when I analyze. So what patterns show up? Again, the data I have, there's at least 10 observations. And when I take the top 20 or 30 vehicles, I find every conceivable pattern. Every month has at least one model with zero sales, and every month has multiple models that hit their peak sales. So the quick bottom line to, is there a new model effect? No, we can find every possible pattern in the sales data. Among just the top 10, 3 have an early peak, one of which the Audi Q3 Sportback then tapers off dramatically, and the Hyundai Elantra, and particularly the Geely Xingrui are still doing fairly well at the 1 year or year and a half point. Then there are other 4 models that in my data set hit their peak at the end of the time period. So 3 of them BYD models, and then the Toyota Wildlander or RAV4, which it hit its peak in the 21st month of being on sale. And then there are 3 models that had their peak between months 6 and 10. So basically find every sort of possible pattern. I can look at the distribution in terms of how many cars, the top line, are selling over 60% of peak in a given month. And in month 3, it's about 50 models, about half of the models. In month 7, it's about half of the models. And after month 10, I start losing data, so it's less informative. If I accumulate across time, it's only in month 7 that half of the 100 models in the data set have hit their peak. But one of these models, the Toyota model, only hit its peak in month 26. So again, wide variation there. The data remain messy. My data are national. However, the Chinese auto industry, both in terms of production and sales, remains strongly regional. So Tesla is strong in the Yangtze River Valley, lower Yangtze River Delta area, Shanghai and adjacent areas. And those were the ones hit hardest by the recent lockdowns. In contrast, BYD production is based in the Pearl River Delta, Guangzhou, and their sales are very heavily oriented to that region of China. And they were relatively unaffected by the recent lockdowns. So ideally, I would have data by region and also data by differentiate by SUVs versus sedans and BEVs that are expanding versus segments that are declining. Anyway, there's no evidence of a new model effect, lots of initial PR, but purchasers appear to pay attention to the content of auto reviews and not just to the headlines and pretty pictures. Manufacturer strategies seem to vary. In line with theory, there are several possible strategies. They seem to be present. We know we'll hear from our keynote speaker. The Ford F-150 Lightning electric vehicle has just gone on sale, and Ford is committed to producing base trim from the start, as well as trying to sell some of the highest priced versions. So they aren't trying to milk the market up front. They're trying to market this to last over time. So new questions then. As I've mentioned, do different segments look differently, perform differently? And then what happens past peak? And the data, at least in another year or two, I'll have enough data where I could analyze that against the sales data. So thank you very much for your time. And for those of you here in person, I hope you are enjoying the conference.